Hello, welcome. This is the LGBTQ History Month Logbooks chat discussion group. My name's Steve Yorkstone, he, him. I am the chair of the LGBT plus staff network. I'm joined by two wonderful people, and together we're going to have a bit of a discussion about some topics in LGBTQ plus history that have come through that podcast, the logbooks. Now, Eloisa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Eloisa, she, her, and I'm the Vice President for Reps and Volunteers at ENSA. And I'm really looking forward to discussing this podcast. I've listened to almost all the episodes because I thought it was really interesting. It's actually Steve that recommended it to me. So yeah, now I'm a fan.
Yeah, I am Esther. I'm also super excited to be here. My pronouns are she, her as well. I am currently president of Napier's Feminist Society, and super stoked to be here, invited to this discussion. I had not heard of, well, I think I'd heard of, but I hadn't actually listened to the logbooks before. But I really enjoyed it, and definitely will keep educating myself through that medium, actually.
So the logbooks is a podcast kind of history, kind of a history of queer experience through the records that were kept of a helpline based in London, and the stories that came through to that. And so that's what we'll be talking through today. And we put together some ground rules for the session. We should let you know that there will be a discussion that may touch on areas around sexuality and adult content. But we think we'll be gentle. We don't think we'll be too shocking, but we will be talking about areas of censorship and some challenges around authority in 1980s where this was set. Shall I stop sharing my screen and we can just talk, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing my screen and we can just talk. And so who wants to kick us off? Esther, do you want to tell us about the podcast?
Yes, so the layout was they essentially went through a bunch of different fragments from this time of accounts from people that were there during a time when there's this queer bookshop. Gaze the Word was the name of it, if I remember correctly. That stocked a lot of queer literature that was imported from all over the place. It was, I think they had titles from the UK as well, but it was essentially this one of probably not that many places that had that wide of a product range for catered towards queer people, in like all forms of literature. And during the 80s, this bookshop was raided, and they lost thousands of copies, hundreds of titles, on the basis that it was considered to be wrongfully traded into the UK, shipped into the UK, and should not be distributed on the basis that it was obscene content, so classed as pornographic content. And that kind of sparked a little bit of an outrage and people challenging that. That was kind of the backstory.
Yeah. What else happened? So it's the history of a little bit about Gaze the Word bookshop as it's raided. And being an old man, I can remember the 80s. So for me, it's quite shocking to think that the police would be raiding a bookshop. Never mind a nightclub. But yeah. Eloisa, what did you take when you first listened to the podcast?
I thought what was really interesting for me was the comparison between the bookshop being raided in the 1980s and then sort of artists on Instagram talking about how their content was being censored online, but that's today. And then I'm also, for example, in other countries that are definitely not LGBTQ plus friendly, for example, in Russia, how different activists have been censored or even imprisoned for just sharing sort of informative queer content. So I thought it was interesting to sort of see this. You listen to this and you think, wow, I can't believe that a bookshop could get raided in the UK. Because, the 80s, it's, at least for me, the way I see the 80s, I still see it as a time that's very quite new and modern. It's not the 30s or the 40s, but it's odd to think that that's still something that's happening today, but in online spaces. So that's kind of what I took away from it, is that this is still very relevant.
Yeah. If I can jump on to that, I thought that, so what I found relevant in tying these two framework or perspectives together of the 80s and now, was that they came onto sort of targeting this bookshop and their distribution of queer literature in all its forms, and attacked it on the basis that it was sort of, they referred back to domestic obscenity legislation, and I find it really fascinating how that was obviously a time during which the LGBT rights were quite prevalent as up in the air. It was during the time they mentioned as well, like the HIV crisis sort of happening and culminating. I don't know exactly when relating to this raid it was, but when it comes to like the importance of actually spreading correct information specifically about this and queer sex and safe sex and things like that, and then just classing that as pornography and obscenity and taking it off and not allowing people to get that crucial information. And I do see that as well a lot on social media today as well, like in 2021. Yes, private people and their art, but also educational accounts that really do just try to spread a message about that's a safe space and safe information for queer people on the queer experience and how to navigate living in this straight normative world. I find highly problematic. But yeah, that was just on top of my head. What about you, Steve? What popped out for you?
I'm kind of thinking about some of the other stuff, because it wasn't just the kind of educational material that was taken, but the guys, when they went into the shop, just didn't know what was obscene or wasn't. So they end up like confiscating D.H. Lawrence, right? Stuff which would
Oscar
be
Wilde.
Oscar Wilde, right? Stuff which we would just like, we'd be reading in somewhere in Merchiston in a literature classroom, right? But and then I think back to what there might have been in, say, an industrial workplace in the 80s, where there might have been a calendar on the wall with a naked woman, right? Or when you open page 3 of The Sun, the newspaper at the time in the United Kingdom, which would publish a glamour model every day. And I just wonder what that means, because in one part of me, I'm like, I feel really uncomfortable if I go into a space and there's a picture of a naked person on a wall, right? But on the other hand, I'm like, but these people shouldn't come into this bookshop to confiscate this material, even though that was probably some Tom of Finland, and that's pretty ripe kind of content. So I feel I can feel that tension, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense to either of you?
I think it does, and it's the fact that one thing would be okay and the other one not, and also I think what's funny with that, with, for example, the calendar, the naked woman, that's sort of just there for everyone to see. A bookshop is more like a space, like a safer space. It's not, and it's more relevant to have that kind of content in a bookshop than just on a random wall, if you know what I mean. So that what makes it kind of out of place, and the fact that the calendar on the wall would be okay, but what's in the bookshop isn't, it's completely wrong. It should be almost the other way around.
I mean, I find this is the same, just as like you said, we still see it today. How we're bombarded with ads on, bikini models, and even sexualization of young people in that way that no one's asking for, but we're getting it anyway. And then when people actually, with, you know, like from their own perspective, put these things out on their own personal channels, they get censored and they get their posts taken down, and it's not okay anymore, because apparently it's okay when it's objectifying someone else, but it's not when it's coming from the person themselves, sort of reclaiming their power.
Yeah, so if you're advertising perfume, you can have nipples over every billboard from here to whatever, but a nipple on Facebook, not so
Yeah,
much.
yeah. And I think a lot of the time there's also, they're heavily retouched and or curated pictures that seem to be catering a lot to the straight male gaze, that seem absolutely okay, and they maybe way more be displaying way more nudity, for example, or be more suggestive than any content that's from a queer person that is not necessarily prescribing to all of those same ideals, and posting something purely out of their own, like with their own consent, and that is taken down, and it's not necessarily even more displaying more nudity at all, but purely because it's not catering to the straight male gaze, it is seen as obscene and needs to be taken down, because this is a danger to people to see, and it will brainwash you and your kids. And yeah,
it's interesting. Like,
definitely see that a lot.
Yeah, like you see like all this like sexualization, but then you're like, you know, God forbid that sexualized person actually takes ownership of their own body and does what they want about it. It's like, no, they have to do that specific thing. And if they take a woman takes a photo of a bit of armpit hair, that's it. We need to take it down. That's obscene. So it's strange.
There was something they mentioned as well in the podcast, which was that during the raid, and I think we can still a little bit see it right now, like the remnants of it, but at the time, that people in the queer community, they were kind of like, okay, so we're meant to have the same rights. This is not actually illegal, but it's still there in people's minds. Like they were struggling to explain to people and to the government that what they were doing was legal, because in their minds, it was so ingrained that it was dangerous, that homosexuality was dangerous, and that it was not, that it was illegal, even though there have been massive shifts recently in that time, like legally in legislation. In the minds of the people, that was still instinctively seen as, no, this is wrong, this is illegal, and having to convince people and make them reread all of the legislation to realize that, oh, actually, this was just a remnant of an old belief system and paradigm that we had. It's not illegal anymore. We can't act like this. Super interesting.
I wonder if it's. I think back to that kind of indiscriminate nature of this kind of bookshop. Okay, it wasn't indiscriminate in that it was Gaze the Word bookshop, very public institution in London where people would gather and communicate. So it was clearly about being queer. But once they were there, they would take all the books. They wouldn't know what the content was. But now there's sort of a different way that it works, isn't there? Do you think this kind of control that we see on social media affects some groups of people more than others? Or is it more kind of, I don't know. I mean, you guys are more in this world than I am. What do you think?
I think it's a difficult one, because obviously I don't know about everything, all the content that gets taken down or not. I think what kind of happens though with social media is that the users themselves can go and flag some content is inappropriate, which is a very good thing, but can also be a bad thing because it can be used against certain people and content. So I would actually, I don't know if it's even possible, but I would like to sort of see, the statistics of posts that get taken down and what they are actually. And also, even though, for example, Facebook, Instagram, they're global corporations, to see how things get taken down in certain countries and how they're allowed and others aren't, even though it's the same platform. I'm not sure how it works, but I don't know. I think it's getting better now, where there's fewer discrimination in posts. But there were so many articles that I've seen with, for example, you would have lots of skinny, white, half-naked women on Instagram, and then a sort of heavier, like, black person would post a photo and that would be taken down, and that has happened quite a lot of times. And then
Absolutely, yeah.
Instagram would have had to apologize for it, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place. So I think there's definitely certain things that probably get taken down a bit more.
Yeah, I do feel like I have seen a lot on the people that I follow on Instagram, like multiple occasions that people that I have followed have shown that they've tried to post something and it's been taken down tens, maybe 20 times, and then they compare it to a picture. Maybe this person who's got this account is in some form of marginalized community, and when I've seen these side to sides of pictures that are the same setting, the same pose, but if it's a fat body, or if it's a black body, or if it's a hairy body, or if it's an obviously gender non-conforming body, or a non-binary conforming body, then it's being taken down. And I absolutely, like, I hope that what you've observed, Eloisa, is true, that it is getting better. But I'm very acutely aware that currently it is happening at a high rate. Totally. I'm not even sure if it's actively personally targeting, but even algorithms can target minority groups, because even algorithms are biased. So that definitely a problem. And I think they mentioned that as well. There was this artist that came onto this episode of the podcast talking about having his pictures taken down, and that he's not even able to get into contact with anyone on the service team because he's just chatting to a bot. There's no one on the other side that can actually solve this problem for him, because it's all just automated, reinforcing these ideals of straight, thin, white bodies.
It's interesting, because that then has those bots are trained by those clicks, which then go over someone's reported, and which then extrapolate, which comes in. So here's a question that we thought about maybe before we came here that might be worth asking. Maybe in some way this is about living, whether queer lives make other people feel uncomfortable or not, and how we walk that line between sharing our genuine lived experiences but not making other people feel uncomfortable. How do we do that, do you think? Or should we just not give it? I'm just going to be hairy and not care and be out there, and if I'm deleted, I'm just going to post it again a million times.
Well, that's
almost where I'm coming from. I kind of think that, because it's not on the shoulders of the oppressed minorities to make their oppressors comfortable. I think that this is something that norm-conforming people have to just deal with. And I understand that, of course, it does create a discomfort, and I think a lot of that, for example, comes from a lot of internalized misogyny and homophobia from cis men and women that have assimilated to a certain point that maybe they're overperforming their masculinity or femininity, and they've internalized this patriarchal system, and then they see someone not conforming to that, and that is controversial and offensive to them and provocative, because to some extent they have already limited themselves, and now they're seeing someone who's not limiting themselves, and that is triggering. So I can understand that, but I do not think that it should fall onto the people that are suffering under this oppression to essentially make their oppressors comfortable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, Esther, and I think the approach that I take is if certain content is allowed, then other people should be allowed to post the same thing, even though their bodies or their identities are different. It doesn't matter. And if it shocks people, it's well, then why shouldn't we be shocked by the other content then, the more conforming one? So I think, no, shouldn't necessarily be apologetic about it. Obviously, we're not talking about like posting like pornographic content on Instagram, but that's not allowed anyway. So
Yeah.
And
But
it's
even
that,
that is it. Yeah.
for me, there's something about context and space. And is this a space where people are entering with consent, understanding what
Mm,
this space is for and how it will work, right? Because there is something about recognizing shared sexuality and shared experience,
absolutely. Yeah.
which is important.
Definitely. No, I see where you're coming from. Like there's a place and a time to talk about certain things, especially when it comes to people can have trauma related to these things, and it
Mm,
can be triggering. They can have histories that make it that a problem for them, and it can be also, kids have access to this. It can just be inappropriate for them. And I'm all for, sex education from quite early on, but there's also a limit to that. Like definitely uh, there's definitely things to be considered in terms of what content is being put out there for young kids that have access to these platforms. So I definitely hear you there. I just think that if it's a form of content that already exists in the sphere of straight um heterosexual, like heterosexual um norm conforming spaces, then I think that either those people putting that out, if they're offended by queer people putting out similar content, then they need to look at themselves and and their internalized homophobia, because then it's not really about the content. Then it's about the the queerness of it. Um, but I definitely hear you for sure.
mm,
and also the fact that when people post things on Instagram, they're posting it on their own accounts. So like if someone doesn't like the content, they can just not follow it. So that's what's good. There's different spaces within within Instagram. So I think you can create a little community of there are spaces for everyone. And obviously, if some people are maybe offended by some type of content, it's not like it's getting thrown in their faces. It's on those different accounts. So, and again, the algorithms. Well, if that person's not interested in that content, Instagram's not going to propose any of that content to them. So I think it's not. I really don't see it as a problem, because if people are not wanting to see that, it will not appear on their Instagram anyway.
mm. I think about how when I work with colleagues in the university, when I share stories about my family or my father-in-law or my queer family, how connecting with that humanity builds a bridge. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And and it feels, even through a camera like this, it feels like there's a connection and there's a sense of being part of something, you know? And
definitely.
I think
I
that
think it's
involves
really,
listening and being aware that the other's experience may also be important too. And that's the point that you made, isn't it? That it's very easy for me to assume that all my people who I know nothing about at work are straight people, but you know, I should always allow
yeah.
space for others to
No,
surprise me.
definitely, and I think it's something that it can be a reaction from people that if someone shares something very, just passing by, it's not the topic of conversation, but they happen to mention their partner that happens to be the same gender as them, for example. Uh, and I've noticed in those situations that some people, they wouldn't necessarily say it, but there's some form of energetic reaction that happens there, that they're kind of like, oh, is that necessary information? Do they have to share that they were gay? And sometimes a lot of the time I think yes, if they want to, absolutely they should have to, because I think it's definitely um, it's a really important part of feeling welcome in a community and feeling safe to be allowed to be your full self.
Mm.
And without, of course, comes consideration to other people's boundaries and not taking over a space. But if someone is sharing, if my male lecturer is sharing that he went on holiday with his wife and 2 kids, then my other male lecturer should be able to share that he went on holiday with his husband and his kids, without that being seen as, a different level of oversharing.
Yeah.
Because it would, like, to a lot of people, that would be like, oh, that was unnecessary. Why did he have to bring his family into it? And
And
it
I
wouldn't
know,
even be considered if it was a straight person.
yeah. And I know some lecturers who will think twice. If I talk about my husband, will my students feel uncomfortable? And I don't want to get in the way of their learning. How do I bring myself? I think there's a bit about being gentle, and I
Yeah.
think if we can feel comfortable with ourselves, it's easy for others to not feel uncomfortable with us, I guess.
Yeah.
Shall we, I mean, I'm a little bit aware of time. Shall we start thinking of some closing reflections? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I want
So,
to just add one thing, if
yeah,
that's
yeah.
okay. I think, like, I'm a fan of walking away from something with, like, action steps. So I do feel like in those situations where we do, like, it's important to consider, for the people that are actually in an oppressed minority, and that they have to be considerate, that they feel that, like, they need to be considerate and walk on eggshells and be very, like, managing and curating how much they're sharing, maybe censoring themselves in different situations, both online and in person. I think it's up to the people that are either comfortably out, uh, or the people that are in a different identity, straight people or gender binary conforming people, um, to be vocal about that it's okay and totally normal, and that it's not even something that we should necessarily have to make a big deal out of. Uh, that I definitely think that's an important one.
I feel like I'm inside your head, Esther, because I was thinking, well, what do I do? How can I help create spaces where people feel more comfortable, which may then ripple out to mean that algorithms become less. And I think I hold my husband's hand when I walk around the park, you
Yeah.
know? And there are some people who furrow their brows, but there's many more people who smile as they
Yes.
walk past.
Yeah.
And I can tell those domestic stories about how my husband never does the dishwasher, which create,
I do think
it's just
people need to
very
hear it.
normal.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah,
people need to hear it as well.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
as long as you feel comfortable talking
yeah,
about it, you're just helping people by saying that, people that might not be out that are like, oh, this guy's talking about it very normally because it is a normal thing. So they're like,
totally.
oh
Yeah.
wow, that's fine. I can do that too.
Yeah.
And then for the people that are, that are like going like, oh no, no. Well, they at least it's that they're seeing it, that it exists. Like there's a thing they can do about it. So maybe it'll make them think twice. The more they see, like gay couples walking around holding hands, maybe it'll become normal to them too, and then they'll stop making funny faces when they see that.
Yeah. I think as well, being true to yourself and being in your identity doesn't in itself constitute activism. Like, you don't have to be an activist for your own identity, but you are allowed to, just be it. You don't have to always take up because I recognize that as well for anyone that's in an oppressive situation or dynamic. Like, I don't always want to bring up the fact that in a certain situation I feel disadvantaged for being a woman. Like, I'm just going to be a woman in the situation. Sometimes I will bring it up and take that debate, but that's not. It's also like, just the identity in itself doesn't constitute activism, and I don't think it's fair to put that onto individuals either. Um,
But I think it's still very powerful to be yourself.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and important. But I think
Yes.
it's easy to put the responsibility on yourself, and you're like, oh, I need to take this
Yes.
fight all the time. I'm so tired. I can't believe I yet again have to defend myself. And that I just wanted to put that there, that you don't have to
You don't.
defend yourself
Yeah.
all the time, but
Yeah.
be be proud.
I think that's a lovely thought. Be proud. Absolutely. Eloisa?
I don't know. I think yeah. Well, I relate a lot to Esther with this, and just like again, like being a woman, it's like you don't want to always be in that fight and always have to like bring up the same topics, but sometimes just being there can already be a fight, or even just not necessarily having a heated debate with someone, but just where if they say something that's not okay, just sort of say, oh, that's not okay, blah blah, but then not necessarily have a huge debate about it, because that can be really tiring, if every day you end up doing that, and it's your whole life becomes activism, but like after a while that's not sustainable. So I think yeah, just being there, just existing, and just making, if a space is not necessarily welcoming towards a certain identity, and you feel comfortable enough to go there and to make yourself shown, then do it, and and that's it, and that's already an act of power, and of showing, reclaiming your freedom, even though you're not necessarily like shouting slogans and things. So yeah.
Yeah. Just in like leading by example, essentially.
Yeah.
You need to sort of go out there and create the reality that you want to be there. It's moving slowly, though. I feel like it is moving, but it's moving quite slowly. But I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I think what happens too is that obviously now, because we live in such like a globalized world, and we're so we've got internet, we're so aware of what's going on in other countries. We kind of we notice even more inequalities in other places. That, for example, maybe before, people would just feel like, oh, in the UK, for example, or in Europe, oh, we're doing great, or we're doing quite well regarding, rights of certain minorities. But then now, because we're aware of other places too, it seems like we're going backwards, when I feel like we still are going forwards. It's just that we're aware of more issues. And it's interesting, like, yesterday I was watching a video. I don't know if you know Yeonmi Park, but she's one of the people who escaped North Korea, and she's become like a very famous human rights activist. And I didn't know that she had a YouTube channel. And she was talking in this video about how in North Korea the word gay doesn't exist, because it's just not a thing. It's not allowed. It doesn't, And then she managed
That's a big mindset shift to even just like learn the fact that it's so censored there.
Exactly. And she was talking about how she went to the United States, and it was just such a shock, even, first of all, not knowing what the word gay meant, what being gay was, and then everything, starting to find out about pronouns and non-binary people. And for her, and she's super accepting of all of it, but it was so overwhelming, obviously, because she'd come from a country where that did not exist. Obviously it does exist, but no one knows about it, I think it's so strange to think that people who are gay in North Korea, for example, they don't even have a word for what they are. So do they even? I don't know.
Yeah, that could be a whole different episode.
Yeah. I know I just opened up on something else.
Yeah, that's a big door.
I would love to have a way into that world. The way the Logbooks podcast gives us a way back in time here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be fascinating to get a view into that, and to see how people navigate that and what their experience is.
Mm.
Oh, maybe I should have been a social anthropologist. I don't know. Never mind.
Yeah. But this was
should
awesome. I do think that looking back into history through like mediums such as this podcast is super, not just interesting in terms of learning about the history, but it does put the today into perspective as well.
Mm.
Yeah. And I've loved catching up with you both. Thank you. And thank you for letting me facilitate a little bit. I do feel
Thank you for having me.
awfully cis white man taking charge. I feel very bad about that, but what can I say? But it was with consent if you are reading this or
Yeah.
watching this later. But thank you. I've enjoyed spending this time.
No,
And
thank you. I
Yeah,
mean, again,
likewise.
it was your idea, Steve. You're the one who showed us the podcast. So
Amazing. Yeah.
yeah,
So good.
and thank you so much, Esther, for hosting this too. It was really nice
yes,
of you.
Oh,
thank
no
you.
worries. I'm super excited about it. Anyone listening, feel free to, share your thoughts and comments on either maybe the the Napier Instagram page or Facebook, or on FemSoc's Instagram or Facebook. We'd love to hear your thoughts if you have them.
If you're a staff member of the university, you can get in touch with us through lgbt@napier.ac.uk. Just email us there. And if you're a student and you want to reach out, we'd love to hear from you too. We'll do all that we can to help you out wherever you are. Eloisa, do you want to close?
Amazing.
Yeah, no, well, thank you everyone for listening. I hope you found this interesting, and yeah, if you've got any interesting comments, anything, just let us know what you thought of this. Give a listen to the podcast, and also I will post this and I'll leave some links as well in the comments about different things that we spoke about, so you can look into it in more detail.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.